Hi, I'm Jeff Ludy, and I'm so glad you're watching this video. Today I want to talk to you about the 4 types of buyers. And you got to stick around all the way to the end because I'm going to tell you about a 5th type of buyer, and that's going to be the bonus information. So, I'm a serial entrepreneur, right? I've owned businesses all my life, and I've spent the majority of my life in sales, as maybe you are if you're watching this video. And I've owned my own businesses, and I've had to learn the hard way, and some things I learned from others, and some things I just naturally kind of fell into and started learning. And this is something I heard from someone else, but it just applies so much. I thought this would be good for you. Now, this channel is called Ask Jeff, because I get a lot of questions, and one of the questions I get from people all the time is, who is my audience? Who's the type of person who wants to buy what I'm offering? And I tell you, if you don't really know that and don't really understand the 4 types of buyers, plus the bonus one, then you're gonna maybe sometimes get into the wrong market. I want you to know that you should not be trying to reach everyone unless you're selling cell phone plans or something like that. If you're a restaurant and you have great food, you're gonna reach a different audience than if you're reaching an audience where a van full of girls comes in to eat cheap pizza, right? So knowing your audience, knowing where you want to position yourself is important so that you can just focus, laser focus on what it is you do. That's more important today than ever before, because with the internet and with people knowing more about what they look for and what they're after, don't try to be everything to everyone. In fact, I'm going to make a video on that specific topic soon, because I heard a saying back when I owned my restaurant and I was in my 30s, early 30s. A guy came to me one time with a lot more experience than I had, and he said, Jeff, don't be a restaurant for everyone. He said, Jeff, my best advice to you would be the cheapest or be the best. And so we just decided we're going to be the best. Narrower audience, but an audience that appreciates what we do. And by the way, more dollars, more profit when you're the best. When you're the best, you can charge more. So let's talk about the 4 types of buyers. Top left-hand corner, I'm going to put here what you might call the cheap buyer. Hopefully you, my friend, are not a cheap buyer. Now, what does a cheap buyer sound like? Have you ever met a cheap buyer? He's like, the first few words out of his mouth is, how much does that cost? And, oh, do you guys have any sales? And, oh, what about a discount? And then whatever you do, no matter what you offer them, they're always going to want something cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. They're always going to talk about price. They're always going to argue with you. And, oh, you're so high. And, oh, that's not fair. And they'll start comparing you. I got another quote that's 20% less. And they'll go on and on and on about being cheap. Now, would you want a cheap buyer? Would that be the kind of person you're looking for? I don't think so. But cheap, I would say there's probably 40% of the world falls into this category of being a cheap buyer. Now, look, I appreciate buying cheap. I appreciate saving money. If I'm going to buy gasoline and it's 93 octane and I'm at a corner where there's 4 gas stations and this one is a nickel less than the other 3, I'm going to go there and buy that gas. For that, that's fine. Now, I'll tell you where it doesn't pertain though, or where I wouldn't do that. If I'm in a hurry to go to a meeting so I can earn $50,000 of profit on a big sale, why would I want to save 3 cents per gallon or 5 cents per gallon and put myself in jeopardy of not arriving to my meeting on time? In that case, it's not all about cheap, it's about convenience. So remember this, people don't put cheap, number 1 on their list, unless they're cheap all the time. Now we all have price on our list, right? Somewhere on my list of things that I need in order to buy a product, price is on there, but it's not number 1. It might be number 3, 4, or 5, but if it's number 1, that's a cheap buyer. And you probably don't want to deal with that guy. Now, the second type of buyer we have is what I call a difficult buyer. A difficult buyer is just someone who's having a bad day or a bad life, and misery loves company. They don't want you to be happy because they're not happy. And no matter what you do for this type of client, they're never going to be happy. You might start off with the price they like. You might have the product they want. And no matter what you do, this person's just going to wear you out. Now, what does a difficult buyer sound like? Difficult buyer sounds like something like, so why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? How come you guys don't this? How come you don't do that? And then once you do sell something to them, they're always like, you know what? I wish I hadn't bought from you. You know what? I think I'm going to write a bad review. These are just difficult people that no one can stand to live with them. It's not about you. They're not taking this out on you. It's just who they are. And they're very difficult. Now, If you had a cheap plus difficult buyer, you might as well just go out of business. These people they'll be underpriced and they'll be overly difficult, and their expectations are going to be higher than what's reasonable, and then they're going to beat you up on the price. I think that is the worst combination. So the goal here is to stay off the left side of my chart. Let me tell you about the people on the right side of the chart. Buyer number 3. Buyer number 3 is a sophisticated buyer. Sophisticated buyer can sometimes be confused with a difficult buyer, and that would be a mistake. Difficult buyers are just difficult for the sake of being difficult. Sophisticated buyers might seem a little difficult, but it's because they need information before they can make a decision. They're not necessarily cheap. They're not necessarily difficult. They're just sophisticated. Now, let me give you an example of that. I have a car I love. It's a 2020 McLaren 720S. It's a Spider, also known as convertible. And I love that car. I enjoy it. I enjoy going down the road in it. But before I made that kind of investment in a car, I went to Google and I did some research. And I went to YouTube and I watched a bunch of videos. And I went to the dealership and I asked a lot of questions. Now, I wasn't being difficult. I just wanted to make sure that I understood what I'm getting when I buy a McLaren 720S. So my typical questions were, how does this convertible top work? And then the answer was, oh, guess what? It's not only the fastest car under $1 million right now, it actually has the fastest convertible in the whole world. It's 11 seconds top to bottom. And Jeff, you can do it while going 30 miles an hour. Ha! Information. I was being sophisticated, not difficult. Be careful when you talk to a sophisticated buyer that you don't get impatient with them. You might get 40 emails before they make a decision. You might get 200 questions before they make a decision. A typical sophisticated buyer is someone who's probably a CEO, someone with higher earnings, who's been very meticulous and very detailed all their career to get to where they are. Don't confuse them. The fourth type, and this is a really good one, is what I call the affluent buyer. Now, the affluent buyer buys off of emotion. They've got the means, they see something they like, price is number 10 on the list. The first thing they might ask is, when can I get one? Oh man, I love that. They're taking a photo of it, sharing it with a friend. They're, hey buddy, come here, you've got to see this. Check this out. Affluent buyers are the very, very best. Now, they do have a budget. They always think about price at some point in the conversation. Sometimes affluent buyers, if they're kind of jerks, right? And that's not the one you want, but they might be a little difficult. But usually an affluent buyer is somewhat sophisticated, but really buys off of emotion. They buy off of what they feel good about. Giving an affluent buyer a great experience, making them understand the value of how they're going to feel when they buy your product or service, is what it's going to take to close this guy. Let me give you an example. If you went to a jewelry store and you took your fiance because you're looking to buy a wedding ring or engagement ring, you're going to be working off of how beautiful is it? What does it look like? How do I feel about this? What's the reaction I saw on her face when she saw this ring? Those are going to be things that are driven by emotion. And you kind of throw money out of the equation, at least for a minute, because you want these things first. You want her to feel like she's getting a good product and she loves how it feels. The word feel is always in this department. The word think is always in this department. A good buyer here, an affluent one, has some think to it, but it's more about how they feel than how they think. You know who a typical affluent buyer is? Usually a woman. Women tend to feel their way through questions and solutions to their need, whereas men tend to think their way through those things. How would I know? I've been married almost 40 years. I think, my wife feels. If I was more like my wife and my wife was more like me, the world would be a better place. And so together we complement each other. So remember, that brings up a point I want to make about all of these. Sometimes when you're dealing with more than one buyer, it could be a CEO and a CFO, or it could be a husband and a wife, or it could be a boyfriend and a girlfriend. You may have a mix of these going on at the same time. It could be that you have a very sophisticated buyer whose spouse is very difficult. And that can give you some push and pull. There could be some tension there. Knowing to answer the questions that might be facing her and knowing the questions that might be facing him, being able to find a way to weave those together is going to help you provide solutions to all parties and close more deals. So those are the 4. Now, where do you find yourself? You personally, where do you think you are on this chart? Because we know this, that wherever you are on this chart is going to be the type of buyer you will attract. If you're a difficult person, you're going to attract a lot of difficult buyers. And guess what that sounds like? A yelling match and finger pointing. If you're a cheap buyer, you're going to spend the rest of your life trying to figure out how to pay the bills because you're just way too underpriced. You're going to get the guys who want to be cheap. And guess what? You're going to be cheap to your employees. You're going to lose them. You're going to be cheap on your insurance. You're not going to have enough coverage. You're going to be cheap on your vehicles. They're going to break down when you're trying to go to work. Being cheap is going to attract cheap people. You're going to act cheap. You're going to get cheap. You get what you pay for. Being sophisticated is actually a terrific one to be because you can help people understand what they don't know about your product and service. But this one also requires patience. And of course, if you yourself are an affluent buyer, you're going to attract affluent clients. And that's a good thing. All right, so I told you about the 4 types of buyers. Hopefully this has been helpful. If it has, please smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you get notifications when we put out new videos. Now a little bonus for you here. I invented this one. This is the 5th type of buyer. The 5th type of buyer, if this being bad and this being good, the 5th type of buyer kind of overlaps right in this area. This is number 5. And I call number 5 an astute buyer. An astute buyer says, yes, I have the affluence to buy whatever I want. Yes, I have questions about what I need. I don't try to be difficult, but some days I'm having a harder day. And they're not cheap. That's why I only gave it a little edge here. But they do care about price, enough to make a smart decision. This guy, who's the astute buyer, ends up getting the best deals at a fair price, fair to all parties. His expectations are realistic about what he's going to get, and he understands the product and has confidence that he or she is making the right decision. You, my friend, if you're an astute buyer, you're going to attract a lot of astute buyers. And when you do, you're going to thank me. Thank you so much for watching this video. Oh, by the way, if you have questions, you can send an email to ask@jeffluty.com, and we'll try to get back to your questions in a video just as soon as we can. Have a great day. We'll talk again real soon.